Welcome to my presentation, Fuzzing by First Principles by Mike Curnow, aka Taco the Boss. A few assumptions to kind of get out of the way before we start. One, that this isn't really a technical talk. It's really more procedural and more about some methods and whatnot. Typically, the talks I do have a lot of beeps and boops and bits and bobs and flashy things to show people, and applying cool practice. All right, so to kind of level set and get some assumptions out of the way here, not a mind reader, so I might talk about some things that you might already know, some things that you don't. And if you're one of those types that kind of gets annoyed when people talk about what you know, sorry about that. But stay tuned, because I think I'll talk about some interesting things here. The next assumption I'm going to make is that the entire audience will not all know what fuzz testing is, or the depth of knowledge may vary, and also that the audience will not know what first principles thinking is. And I feel, based on what I see on LinkedIn, this is the case, just in general. And then I will make the assumption that the audience does have some knowledge of cybersecurity and programming. That's why we're all here at CarolinaCon. All right, so to get started here, over the agenda, or the agenda, as they say in Canada, I think. Quick intro about me. I'm going to talk about fuzz testing, covering what it is, why you would do it, First principle thinking, kind of a crash course intro to that at a very high level, just enough to kind of consume what it is. Do some story time about where I applied FTP, model of framework of thinking, to fuzzing, and then I'll talk about a paper I wrote that contains a framework that hopefully helps you all to do the same. Okay, first off, about me. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for a secure networking provider. I've saturated my career with many different roles and responsibilities to cover red, blue, purple team. I was doing purple team before that was, I think, really coined a thing. I think that's more of a recent thing. But and then you can just Google or go to my website. I've done enough talks to where I've gotten kind of tired of putting this huge slide about myself. So just check my website out and go from there. What is fuzz testing? So fuzz testing, generally put, it's discovering bugs in software utilities by providing random or unexpected inputs into the programs that you're testing to find test cases that will cause a crash. There are a lot of different definitions out there, and I mean that more from a kind of marketing perspective. I've seen many organizations claim to do fuzz testing, and maybe they do a facet of it, or their definition of fuzz testing is something a good bit different than what you would get from Barton Miller's paper, which we'll talk about in a few minutes here. So I've got a couple of definitions here. I've got the one from IEEE, which is the degree to which a system or component can function correctly in the presence of invalid inputs or stressful environmental conditions. I like that definition. Now, the one thing I do want to say, which is a personal preference, is fuzz testing is often one of the things about it is that people say you can determine, kind of like a stress testing, what's the threshold of load that your utility or program can run until it crashes. I actually like to handle the stress testing separately, typically before actually doing the quote-unquote fuzzing. And that's just so that I know what my threshold is. So, like, if I send something like, 2,000 packets a second and it crashes in 2 seconds, I've got a pretty good left to right limit of what I can stuff into my um, iterations as far as like fuzz runs and whatnot. Anyways, bit of a tangent, but yes, and the next one, fuzz testing is varying levels, both of science and art. I truly do believe that. That's why I quoted it. Essentially, it's the act of producing unexpected outputs by providing unexpected inputs, and everything else from there is situational. And that's by me, and that's my definition. You can quote me on that. And that last sentence is very important. Everything else is situational, or everything else from there is situational. Fuzz testing, it's an art in the fact that you've got to kind of be artistic in the way that you apply it to varying targets and systems that you might be testing, and hence the situational portion of that. Moving on. Purpose is to find bugs, assertion failures, memory leaks, trying to make a target crash, or being able to identify any invalid inputs that you can actually enter. And the invalid input part is pretty important because certain systems that you might be testing might be vulnerable to something like remote command injection or something, remote command execution, that kind of, it prevents certain things from happening. And yeah, crashes is a big one too, because sometimes you can provide input to a program or a utility and it's not expecting that format, and it'll just hang. All right, so moving on. So still on what is fuzz testing, just kind of in a nutshell, generate random inputs, having a program or a way to interact with that device under test. So however you're crafting your session, be a browser, could be a script, could be an API, and identifying the strings of what is causing your device to crash or hang or generate kind of the unexpected output. Who created this method? So in late 80s here, Barton Miller was a programmer and professor at University of Wisconsin, and he had this kind of interesting revelation where, I say revelation, because at the time, you wouldn't classify it that, but now, as someone who's tested a lot, I'd say it's a very important discovery. While he was working on the terminal on his workstation, which was connected to a dial-up modem during a rainstorm, every now and again he was getting kind of garbled gibberish stuff on his command line while he was typing. And it kind of became this game of trying to input and run coherent commands before these random strings would render his commands incoherent. And so the kind of light bulb went off there, that these things are causing his utilities and his programs to crash that he was working on. And that was kind of a light bulb that kind of drove him to work on this paper called An Empirical Study of the Reliability of Unix Utilities. Google that. It's really good. You can find the PDF pretty easily. So yeah, basically this programmer was sitting down and realized that random characters were happening during a rainstorm, and the incoherent inputs were making his utilities fail. Okay, why would you fuzz test? Whenever you have anything that has interfaces to the world or to users or whatever, you're expanding your attack surface, right? So if you're looking at it from a threat modeling perspective and you're looking at a web application, very high level here. It's like, hey, I've got a web app, I'm running WebSockets, I've got an API, and I've got an input form, right? It's super simple. So you fuzz test whenever you have, or why to fuzz test is that anything that has inputs, there's a potential it could be compromised. Maybe you didn't properly do input validation on the back end, or maybe you only did it on the front end, storing front end values, where on the back end it just processes whatever the front end sends it, you know? Um, it's a way to understand all the unknown things and faults in your attack surface. That's pretty much it. That's why I want to do it, if you want to test these things. And you'd want to test these things if you have any inputs, if you have any way to interface with the outside world, can interact with it. Um, when to fuzz test? I say early, often, and a lot. Do it as much as you can. At previous positions, I would manage some vulnerability management practices for automotive OEMs, and they would essentially have these fuzz tests running on their diagnostic tools every day, every day, and they'd have every time a change was made to that code, there'd be more testing, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd say build it into your DevOps practices, and I put the term DevSecOps in there, which is a bit of a cringe term, because, well, at least in my opinion, it should be just DevOps. You're just adding a new piece to DevOps. And there's a whole separate tangent that we can go on regarding DevSecOps and all that stuff and what you should be putting in DevOps. But, you know, fuzz testing, it really should be something that's done a lot, but maybe having situational changes based on whatever, you know, gates or milestones in your DevOps cycle. If you're a tester, then you want to test it. Pretty much it's just like I said, if you have a target that accepts inputs, and that could be informational, programmatic. I put, sorry, I just realized this mouse is in the center of the screen. I put, etc. at the as the last items here, because there are going to be things that I miss that, as this isn't a super technical discussion, I don't really care about that. So if I'm missing something, just put it under etc. so I can't be chastised for it. How to fuzz test. It's going to come up later, but yeah, let's carry on here. All right, so moving on to first principles thinking. It's probably a term that's been a lot more prevalent on people's minds the past few years, at least, with like many entrepreneurs telling their super secret sauce business acumen secrets and stuff. But yeah, so first principles thinking, also known by reasoning as reasoning by first principles, and it's really a thought model that when you're faced with problems of varying complexities, the idea is that you just break the problems down into the very core constituents, to the core truths, and then you remake them from the ground up. That way, you're building an understanding of each piece and layer that you're building up. So when you do that, that kind of allows you to build your own personal knowledge base and understanding, allowing you to kind of create the most, the best built for purpose solution. Meaning if you employ this kind of framework when faced with something, you know, complicated, you're likely to produce a very built for purpose-built solution for it. And that's opposed to reasoning by analogy, which this is my it's a low-resolution way of thinking that limits you to building knowledge bases and solutions based on prior assumptions, beliefs, and widely held quote-unquote best practices approved by a majority of people. I typically do not subscribe to or condone this way of thinking. However, if you do work in spaces where you're beholden to regulations because you work with like the DoD and they need you to be CMMC compliant by the end of, I don't know, 2024 or 25 or whatever, or you're working in power and you've got to meet NERC SIP, or if you've got automotive OEMs and you have to adhere to TSACs and UNECE WP29. Those are fine because the client is saying that, hey, you've got to adhere to this, or the government or whatever. I'm not talking about that, because there will be problem sets within that will be complex and require creative problem solving. Um, but I say this because it's very typical for us to just Google a way of doing something a little bit differently and then consume it and then change it barely without understanding the constituents of that thing that we're copying. So, yeah, I'm not a fan of that way of thinking, but it's something that we all do in different ways. And here is an illustration of the ladder of reasoning by analogy. And the caption at the bottom says, I don't know where I'm going, but since everyone's here, it's got to be good. That's kind of playing a bit more on Cialdini's influential principle of what is it called? Public proof or whatever. Everybody else does it. I'm going to do it too. It's like a combination of social proof and the newest seventh principle of consensus. Anyways, it's very easy to slip into. So I put that here to illustrate that. Not everyone's walking off a cliff, but it was kind of a funny image to not include. And I, for the purposes of kind of making it rather simple and so that everyone can generally grasp it, I liked Elon Musk's take because he was asked this on an interview, and he was able to give a very boiled down, uh, 3 steps on how he reasons by first principles. And so the 3 steps are identify and define your current assumptions. So like that would be if I'm at the bottom of a staircase and I'm playing a game in which there are 10 stairs on the staircase and I'm only given 5 steps. Well, then the assumption is I can only step 5 steps, right? Break down the problem into its fundamental principles, and you get into this weird tangential rabbit hole about how you walk on stairs and yada yada, and you create new solutions from scratch, which would be just skip every stair. That's a stupefied example of it, but hopefully that kind of gets you to where this will bring you. So I'm going to tell a story of how I applied this kind of mindset recently, somewhat recently, recently enough for me to write things about it and want to share it with everyone. So, which means I have to better reason enough in memory at least. So, last year I was leading a pen test for an industrial site, and this industrial site had a few components to it. Just to kind of keep things high level here, I've got a simple diagram of there's engineering stations up here. So for those of you that don't know, this is kind of like an industrial site. And industrial sites have somewhat different technology. It's called ICS, or Industrial Control Systems, which are basically a lot of these little ruggedized computers that dictate the action and flow of like physical things in the real world. So like water, power, transportation, traffic lights, trains, planes, automobiles, even. Well, it's a little bit different in cars, but manufacturing, pharmaceutical manufacturing, power plants, well, whatever, you name it. Anything that's got a physical reaction in the real world has some sort of controller that has agency over that real world device. And so I was doing some testing for something like this. And it was for these kind of like streetcars, right? You might have, I'm sure everybody knows what a streetcar is, but for those that don't, it's like public transportation system that's on the ground level for the most part. And so the target PLC was actually an RTU, which is a remote terminal unit, which is if you've got like a remote engineering station and you have these things out in the field, these things receive commands from the engineers and whatnot, and then these then relay all the different commands down to the different PLCs that have agency over devices in the real world. So our target was this, to see in what ways this can get fucked with, and then, do a fucking pen test. So now, getting a little bit deeper into it, This particular PLC was made is this isn't a vendor bash or anything. This is just a case study here. This was I say that because whenever people say names of companies, that can be misconstrued or misunderstood in a variety of ways. This PLC, the RTU, whoops, was made by GE, and the reason I'm just saying it is because I have port 18245 here, which you can just Google that shit and see what it is. But yeah, they make PLCs. GE stands for General Electric for those of you that don't know. And in the initial stages of the pen test, we were scoping the fuzzing. And very lightly put, we already knew that port 502 was going to be there and active, which is the Modbus protocol, it's an industrial protocol that a lot of PLCs talk over. So we knew that was there. That was accounted for. We had a nice, great big, super shiny plan for that. But when I got on site, what I didn't know was that this was going to be active and would be running a proprietary protocol, which we knew nothing about. And that 18245, that is GESRTP, or GE Service Real-Time Transport Protocol. And that is how engineering software, so the people in here, and the HMI, which stands for Human Machine Interface, which is this little flat screen that sits in front of a cabinet that you interface with this to tell your target PLCs what to do. GESRTP is how these devices did that. And well, that expanded the scope. That expanded the threat model there. So we redid the threat model. We looked at the scope for fuzzing. Now, the SRTP protocol is not public. It's not well documented. It's all proprietary. So I had no idea what the hell I was doing at all with it, which is exactly the place that I like to be in. Is not knowing what the hell I'm doing, because I can, start from zero and reason up from there. So, what I did from there was I used a lot of a framework called Fluff that I wrote, which I will show here real quick. Okay, so we're sticking a pin in this. I'm going to move over to the Fluff documentation. So I was working on a couple of fuzz tests simultaneously, and I realized there was a lot of similarities between them, but I couldn't really find any industrial specific frameworks that would work with what I was trying to do. But then I realized that, hey, this web application that I was doing WebSocket subprotocol fuzzing with, I'm actually following some very similar high-end methodologies that I'm doing with this industrial control site here. So I wrote this framework called Friendly and Lightweight Unified Fuzzing Framework. You can get it on my website. I'll show you how in a bit. Essentially what this is it serves as kind of like a stencil that I can take and I can just kind of just slap on whatever the hell I'm doing. And I ought to be able to rectify the situation and come up with a plan based on this. And the first principles thinking is kind of what brought me here. So I used my own framework to solve this problem here. So I had to do this from scratch. I'll go through this real quick. So yeah, again, Fuzz Fluff. It's a high-level framework on how to do fuzz testing if you don't know what the hell you're doing, which is me in a lot of cases. Then I talk about how, here we go, what fuzz testing is. I talk about how fuzz testing is a pain in the ass. I talk about the framework architecture. So, yeah, so your session, starting with session, that's how you interact with the target you're trying to fuzz. you want to have that situated. So if it's a browser, an IDE, an app, a function script, whatever. Actually, let me scroll down here because I have a more flexible. Here we go. So you can extend it, just add whatever you want to it. How you're collecting it, whether it's you're collecting session captures, so you're proxying through something, or if you're capturing actual packets and analyzing the data sent in those packets. So you collect it, you analyze it, then you craft. And then crafting can be a request packet input. Then you get into things like generational and mutational block, which I'll get into later. And then you actually run the fuzz and monitor simultaneously, and then you report. So using this, I realized that because I didn't know what I was doing, this is a protocol that was really undocumented, didn't have any public documentation from the vendor. We'd have to get a bit creative, and so we didn't have the session figured out just yet, but we did have some engineers on site do some packet captures, and we understood some things in the data that allowed us to start generating test fuzz cases from there. And then I kind of stepped back into session and realized, hey, it might be a little bit easier if we make some kind of Python automation to do this. So we collected, we analyzed, and went back to session. Then I went to craft. Then I went to fuzz and monitor and report. And back to here. So once we had all that stuff figured out, I ended up writing a fuzzer that allowed me to fuzz GESRTP because it's didn't exist. So I've got the first of its kind GESRTP input fuzzer. Which, so like after the fact, we did actually end up finding some research. Someone did do some like Wireshark, like PCAP and Wireshark, and then kind of identify based on different kinds of communications which bytes are the ones that change for what, and basically to build out the commands. And so I was able to take that and the research that we gathered from the engineers on site doing the PCAPs that we were able to break down in combination with this to help us understand which bytes need to be changed to, denote a certain type of command or information or whatever, and then create a fuzzer in which really the input just looked like this. And so when you're talking SRTP, you've got to send it data that looks like this. And then based on the different bytes that change based off of the research here and what we're able to identify, we were able to do dumb fuzzing, smart fuzzing. So basically generational, mutational, and block-based. And then we got some raw input in here that lets you actually send it actual commands. And there's some idiosyncrasies with it as well, where you have to send it an initiator message before you send it a command, which isn't addressed in the research or anything other publicly. So, so that's kind of it. It's kind of it for that. And so the first principles thinking and how it applies to this, we'll visit that here. I hope all that made sense. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to ask after. Okay, so first principles, step one, and the Musk model, if you will. Identify and define your current assumptions. In this scenario, the assumption is I cannot fuzz this PLC's SRTP protocol since there are no fuzzing tools or documentation for it. Kind of went off on this one, but I really don't like this kind of thought path here. It's lazy, low resolution, cowardly subscription that standard and typical thinking will lead you to. This assumption encases a certain sense of surrender that you should not have as a quote-unquote hacker or pen tester charged with the responsibility of testing systems with potentially life-threatening physical impact. You don't want to stop there. So we got to think our way around this. But we've identified our assumption, and that's the thing that's the brick wall in front of us that you think you can't get through. Next, break down the problem into its fundamental principles. Can't spell fundamental without fun. And fun it is. What would I need in order to fuzz this unknown protocol? So basically, taking our assumption, you can break it down to a series of questions, or in this case, I just flipped it on its head and said, okay, what would I need to do in order to do this? You need to build an understanding of the protocol itself, and then craft a way to actually act on our newfound understanding. Read research papers or articles. I did that. There was no formal or vendor documentation that existed, but there was that one paper that I found kind of later on, which did help in retrospect for me to go back and fix some stuff. And then do the technical research, do your session and PCAP analysis, and have, if you don't know something yourself, have somebody on site there or someone that knows the application or test or device help you out, do the session capture for you, walk you through some of the processes. In this case, it was basically just recording, which bytes were moving as we were doing simple things like turn this on, turn this off, to change this to this. You're trying to kind of feel your way around it, kind of like you're in a dark room and there's a chair there, but you don't know it's a chair, so you're just kind of feeling around it to see what it is. And then craft a way to fuzz the protocol itself. So you need an ability to craft varying fuzzing types. So there are 3 known ways of fuzzing. There's probably some more that I'm missing here. I forgot to put an etc. in there. But there's generation-based, which is a brand new input from scratch, but based on a format. So like, for example, if you've got a protocol that is, the data you send it is like 10 characters long, it's in a certain format, it's got certain kinds of characters, you build that in, but you randomize the things that change about it. So the alphanumerics of it, and maybe even some strange characters in there, right? Then you have mutation-based, which is bit flipping, but it's really randomization. Taking in an input that was originally valid and then bastardizing into some weird perverted version of itself, maybe with some Chinese or Arabic characters in there or something, right? And there's block-based, which is identifying the parts of the taking a valid input, knowing it does require some knowledge of the protocol, because you're taking the inputs, and with knowing the protocol and knowing what changes in it, you're only doing fuzzing based on those particular sections that changed. So like block-based fuzzing was built into the SRTP fuzzer, because as we built to understand the protocol, we were able to identify what parts changed and just go from there. Then you need an ability to deliver that fuzz, or apparently the ability to delivery, which was a typo. But you need a way to do that, because nobody wants to hit enter on a keyboard like 3 million fucking times. That's not fun. So it's, automate that shit. And step 3, create new solutions from scratch, which is what I did with the fuzzing tool. I said, hey, I'm really good in Python. I can do this shit pretty quickly. Most of the GESRTP fuzzer, like maybe more than 2/3 of it, I actually programmed on site. I programmed and tested on site, and then other parts were like crafting a library for the different bytes and the inputs, and making the classes for those and whatnot. And then I, made sure that Python script was able to accommodate the, some of the varying types of fuzzing that we would need in this scenario, which would be generational, mutational, and block-based fuzzing. Hold on here. Yeah, so that is, that's pretty much the size of it. So when I had first worked on this, I initially planned on going a bit more in depth into the fluff itself. I can do that again real quick. So going from top to bottom, we've got session, which is the means that you will communicate with it. We've got collection, so a way to generate session traffic that you can, build cases against and then analyze it to understand what parts. Like here, right here is just like a quick little session capture from OWASP's Zap proxy, which I use prolifically. I typically always start with it just because I've been using it for a long time and it's second nature to me now. And then crafting, which is I've got a quick little Python script here, or Python function here, just a super simple, I think I was trying to build this to show someone how to use Redamza. But if you ever want to work on mutational fuzzing, Redamza is a really good way to go because it's basically an input mutation engine. Just Google Redamza, and there's also a Python library too, PyRedamza, PyRedamza. And then fuzz and monitor at the same time. So while you're executing your fuzzing, it's good to have some kind of monitoring in place. So you can, like here, I've got the same script, and I've got some very stupid, simple monitoring, which is not very good, but just enough to kind of show that, hey, we're looking for, like good valid requests versus not. But typically you want to go a bit deeper with this if you can. If there's no way, like if you're doing this kind of thing black box and you have the device in front of you and you don't have any way of actually accessing it to get any kind of feed to monitor from, an oscilloscope is maybe not a bad way to go because you just kind of touch the contacts of the device or devices, and you're just looking at the voltage amplitude. So, if you're if the inputs you're doing are causing your device to use more processing power, then the whoops will go crazy. And if it's just kind of running like normal, you have to identify what normal is too, just based on building a baseline. But yeah, a simple way of doing it, if you don't have an oscilloscope, there's a cool Linux tool called Exoscope, which uses your audio input as a way to measure, changes in voltage amplitude. Which you need a cable to contact with, but it's a good solution for what it is, I think. And then reporting, and that's going to be different depending on what your use case is. But typically, you want to see you want to report on the robustness of the device under test. You want to look at the input validations, and then you want to look at timeouts if you're doing like stress testing or whatever. And then how to manipulate any logic. This was written mainly for using the overarching case of industrial control systems. And then we've got I've got a few example use cases on how you'd probably go through this here, at least how I would. And this is the idea. It's just like a nice little thing that you can take and slap on what you're doing, and it should kind of give you a place to start from. But yeah, so I applied this to what I was doing. It's kind of circuitous because I made updates to it. I made some recent updates to it based on some things that I learned from the engagement that I was using it for. But yeah, so conclusion, fuzzing is leveraging unexpected inputs to produce unexpected outputs. So really is trying to learn the unexpected things in your applications interfaces and anything that you identify as the quote-unquote attack surface. First principles thinking is chopping things down to the core truths and then building it back up from there. And then applying first principles to your first principles thinking to your fuzz testing engagements will build a more holistic, built-for-purpose solution. So in this scenario, there was a lot of drilling down and microscopic and kind of surgery going on regarding breaking down this protocol, understanding how it worked. And then now I've got a solution that anytime that I ever have to test the same kind of family of PLCs and RTUs and whatnot, I've got something locked and loaded I can run with. So, yeah, that is that. I've got contact info in here. Really, if you just search taco underscore the underscore boss and whatever, I should probably be in there. I've tried to make sure that name was taken throughout my social media stuff. Um, but yeah, that's pretty much it here. Um, let's see. Was there any questions? Mm. Ha, yeah, that was pretty funny. Agenda. I don't really know if the Canadians say agenda. I just kind of made that up on the spot because it sounded funny. Uh-oh. Anywho's, yeah, that's it for me here. Thank you very much for tuning in, and if you didn't, then I guess this will be on video soon. So, but yeah, if you have any questions on fuzz testing, hit me up at taco underscore the underscore boss at protonmail.com, or anywhere else that has taco the boss there. So, all right.